Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Dr. Lank. I'm a pediatrician. I work at Hoag Medical Group in Huntington Beach, and I'm thrilled today to be here to talk to you about how to raise a healthy infant, what to know during the first 12 months. As a side, before I jump right in, not only am I a pediatrician, but I'm also a mother of 2 kids under 2 right now. So I have a 3-month-old at home and a 20-month-old. So I actually just got off of my maternity leave. So not only am I teaching this daily, but I am living it daily. So hopefully this presentation will help to answer some of the questions that you might have. If not, I will be for sure answering any questions that you have at the end. Okay, and here's an outline of my presentation. Okay, so during the hospital stay, what happens? So your baby is born. Obviously, it's a very exciting time. It's full of a lot of emotions. Everyone's really happy. Right away, you experience that golden hour where essentially you and your baby and your partner experience a intense bonding moment for about an hour you have without any interruption at all, which is really special. So very minimal contact with anyone in the hospital. It's really time for you to truly get to know one another and start that bonding experience. So you'll start doing some skin to skin, the mom and the baby will, and that helps with regulation of respirations, temperature, and heart rate for your baby. And you'll also want to start some breastfeeding during that time. And all this will help with your breast milk production. And then after the golden hour is over, your baby will receive hepatitis B, vitamin K, and erythromycin ointment. These are all very important and very helpful and providing safety for your child and for the rest of their infancy. And throughout the stay during the hospital, you will be seen by a pediatrician daily. You'll have obviously a lot of support from your nursing, and you'll have lactation assistance, and your baby will have some very important screens that will be done before discharge, and then obviously you will be planning your follow-up with the pediatrician afterwards. So in terms of follow-up, okay, something's happening with my remote. Oh, there you go, there you go. So your baby will be seen within 2 to 3 days after discharge, so they'll be around 3 to 5 days of life. And then after that, they're seen at 2 weeks, 2, 4, 6, 9 months, and 12 months. So a lot goes on at your visit with the pediatricians. So it's not just about vaccines. We go over a lot of different things about nutrition, elimination, growth, sleep, safety, and so forth. So for nutrition, so as most of you most likely know, breastfeeding for the first 6 months is ideal for your baby. And there are many, many benefits of breastfeeding, some of which I listed here. Overall, for your baby, you see a lot of decreased incidence of infections. It helps to optimize their development and their cognition. And for mothers, you see an earlier return to pre-pregnancy weight, decreased risk of cancers, and it obviously promotes bonding, and it's economical and readily available. Just take a little sip here. And in terms of some breastfeeding truths, some things that most people may not talk about in the beginning, but breastfeeding is not often the easiest thing to establish. So it usually takes practice. Your baby's learning, you're learning. So just be patient with yourself, be patient with your baby, and know that we're all here to help. Your pediatrician's here, your nurses while you're in the hospital, and lactation. Also, we have a great, Hoag has the baby line, which offers lactation assistance once you're out of the hospital. So please feel free to reach out for help if you need it. And in order to help yourself or in order to set yourself up for success, some things you want to do are initiate breastfeeding earlier on. As I mentioned, early during the golden hour is best. You want to nurse on demand. You want to listen to your baby's cues. So some things that your baby will show you in terms of when they're hungry for food, you want to look for signs of alertness, mouthing, rooting. They might be sticking their hand in their mouth. Those are all signs that you want to look for. You don't want to wait until there's crying. Crying is actually a late sign, so despite what some people might tell you, you don't want to wait for that. It's actually really hard to establish a good latch once they are crying. And then also you want to know that generally for breastfeeding, you feed around 8 to 12 times in a 24-hour period, about 10 to 15 minutes per breast, and you don't want to go any more than 4 hours without feeding. So for the first couple days after your baby is born, you'll be giving them what's called colostrum, which is a very, very powerful and beneficial milk for your baby. So it's a yellow color and it's full of nutrients, protein, vitamins, minerals, and antibodies, and it is just liquid gold for your baby. And then after around day 3 to 5, you'll notice that your milk will be coming in and you'll feel a lot fuller about that time. The milk will transition to a more creamy white color. Still very high in nutrients for your baby and still includes antibodies. And something that some parents don't really know too much about in the beginning is the concept of supply and demand. So it's important to know that anytime you introduce anything other than breast milk to your baby's diet, you need to increase the amount of supply that you have. So for instance, if you have a bottle with formula, your body won't know that you need that, so you need to pumps in order to keep up with your supply. And sometimes mothers are worried in the beginning that they don't have enough milk, but I assure you what you have is enough. As you can see on this slide here, there are, your baby starts off with a very, very small stomach, and what you're producing for them is definitely enough. And that colostrum is very powerful. So just remain calm, drink a lot of water, do lots of skin to skin, and you'll be just fine. So in terms of storing breast milk, here's some rules here that you might want to remember. I generally think, though, that the easiest thing is if you start pumping and storing breast milk, the easiest way is just to put it in the freezer. That's where it is stayed the freshest for the longest, and then you don't have to worry about all these other things. So keeping track of how long some have been in the refrigerator for and things like that, so you can just thaw it as needed. And then once you thaw it, you do need to use it within 24 hours, and then know that anytime that that milk touches your baby's mouth, you need to use that within 2 hours. So for the first 6 months, you don't want to give your baby anything other than breast milk or formula, ideally for the first 6 months. So obviously there's no water or juice. Something that parents don't know either sometimes is that in a 24-hour period, we expect for your baby to eat around 24 ounces. So it's about an ounce an hour. So if it's been 3 hours in between feeds, you want to give 3 ounces, 4 hours, 4 ounces, etc. And generally that's the way it goes. Sometimes it goes up to 30 ounces in a day, but that's usually when they're a little bit older. And then the amount that they take per feed does increase with the more sleep that they get. So, but again, that's a little bit old when they're 4 months plus. You might start seeing that amount increase per feed. So in terms of formula, there's a lot of different kinds out there, but basically what I usually recommend is just start with the most basic one. So Enfamil, Similac, you don't need all the extra things like the extra additives. Usually those are saved for babies that have an issue or if there's some sort of medical need. So just start with the most basic formula. So for vitamin D supplementation, I always recommend vitamin D regardless of if there's any formula or even if there's exclusive formula, I still recommend vitamin D. That's because you need around 32 ounces plus of formula per day to get enough vitamin D, and generally babies aren't taking that. So other sources of vitamin D include your food and the sun, and these things your baby will not be getting. So I always recommend vitamin D, and I generally like to recommend the D drops that you'll see down there on your slide. It's just because it's super easy. You put a drop on your finger and right in their mouth, and that's it. Okay, so for spit ups, all babies have some level of spit ups, and generally it doesn't cause any problems. So know that this happens. Usually it's not a concern. Obviously, if you start noticing that there seems to be discomfort or weight loss, of course you want to talk to your pediatrician, and here are some ways to help at the bottom, but I would definitely talk to them if you're noticing that seems to be a problem with their spit ups. Okay. So for solids, I usually say to wait until 6 months, but 4 months is the earliest. Usually by 6 months, they seem to be a lot more ready for solids. So there's lower incidence of iron deficiency anemia, obesity. They're able to process the food a lot more at that time. And they're also usually developmentally ready. They have a lot more truncal support, head control, and they need to be interested. If you notice that they don't seem to be interested in it, you can always stop and try again in a couple of weeks. Don't worry, they will come around, but you don't want to force it. And then up until 12 months, the main source of your baby's calories should be coming from the breast milk or formula that you're giving them. The solids are really a supplementation. So you want to introduce a wide variety of foods, and something that also parents don't know is that the allergenic foods are actually recommended to be introduced early on too now. So even at 6 months you can start doing the allergenic foods. And if your baby seems to not like a certain kind of food, it actually takes 15 times to try a food to determine if they don't like it or not. Obviously, you want to avoid any choking hazards, and the big rules are avoiding honey or cow's milk until 12 months of age. But cow's milk meaning you don't want any cow's milk to replace the formula or the breast milk that you're giving them, but you can offer things like cheese and yogurt. Okay, and so once you start solids, you can start water, and I never really recommend juice. It can cause loose stools, and it's just not doesn't really offer any benefit at all nutritionally. And over time, you're just going to start increasing the types of textures and types of food that you're giving your baby. It just depends on their interest and what they like. And eventually, by 12 months, you want to transition to 3 meals and 2 snacks. So at 12 months, there is a big change in their feeding. So babies usually do this on their own, but you'll start seeing that they have more solids, they want less milk, you want less than 24 ounces of milk a day, and you transition to whole milk, and then you discontinue bottles. Okay, so elimination. Okay, so back to the beginning. Per day of life, you're expecting at least 1 wet diaper. So basically day 1 diaper, day 2, 2, and so forth until day 5. And generally around then you have around 5 to 8 per day. Stools are a lot different. So for the first few days, expect a Meconium stool. So that is a thick black tarry stool, and that will eventually transition to a yellow, looser stool, usually with little seeds in it. And in general, babies can stool either with every single diaper change, you'll notice a stool, or it'll be less than 1 per day. They can actually skip several days, even up to 7 days, and not have a poop, and it can be completely normal as long as everything else is fine. So as long as they're eating well, they're not vomiting, they're not in discomfort, etc. Things that we don't like about poops is if they are hard, small, or pebbly. Obviously, we don't like that. Or if they are black, white, or red. Okay, sleep. So sleep is always a hot topic. Just know that before 4 months, you won't really be getting that much sleep. That's just how it is, and that's developmentally appropriate for your baby. They sleep a lot, but they sleep in small increments. And that usually doesn't change until 4 months. And I usually don't advise doing any sort of adjustment until that time in terms of sleep training. I don't recommend that until 4 months plus because that's just developmentally appropriate for them. So they need to be able to self-soothe, and that's not until 4 months. And so at that point, you do expect 6 hours straight at 4 months, and then upwards on you expect longer stretches. So 6 months and up, anywhere from 10 hours to 12 hours. And so when you start thinking about those things, oh, and another thing too that parents often don't know is that babies start off as night owls. So they are usually up more at night than they are during the day, and that transitions around 2 months. So if you do start thinking about sleep training after 4 months, after you're able to realize that developmentally and they're growing well, you just have to be very consistent with what you do. So that's the bottom line with sleep training. So you want to do the same thing every night. You want to just develop a schedule for them. Rocking, you want to read to them, do bath time, and then something that will set you up for success if you establish earlier on is to put them in their crib or their bassinet before they actually fall asleep, so when they're drowsy. That will help a lot for their sleep. Okay, and so for decreasing the risk of SIDS, so this is obviously very important. You want your baby to be in a crib or bassinet in your room up until 12 months really is the safest, but 6 months at minimum. And you want your the crib or bassinet to have a firm mattress with a fitted sheet and nothing else in there. So no pillows, no blankets, no stuffed animals, nothing. And then you want your room temperature to be comfortable, and you don't want to overdress your baby, and you don't want anyone to be smoking around your baby. Okay, so for routine care, Obviously, if there's any issues, you want to talk to your pediatrician. Especially if there's a fever greater than 100.4. In terms of the umbilical cord, you want to keep that dry. You don't really want to touch it at all, and it'll usually fall off around day 7 or so. And then avoid any sort of submersion bath before that happens, and once the sump falls off, you can bathe your child. You want to avoid any direct sunlight because you can't actually apply sunscreen until greater than 6 months, as long as you can't avoid direct sunlight. So it's best to wait, though, for longer than 6 months. And in terms of dressing your baby, usually they are comfortable in whatever you're in, plus a layer. And once they have a tooth eruption, you do need to start brushing their teeth, and that's twice a day with a small smear of fluoride-containing toothpaste. So for safety, you want to keep them in a car seat facing backwards in the car. You want to avoid any hot liquids. At home, you want the temperature of your water to be less than 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And the concept of cocooning is very important. So you want your baby to be surrounded by those that are vaccinated. So the Tdap vaccine, the flu, and now COVID, because infants aren't able to receive a lot of these vaccines yet. So childproofing, you want to think about this early on. So you want to definitely start thinking about this and implementing it before your baby's actually moving around. So around 6 months usually is when you want to start thinking about these things. So you want gates on the stairs. You want to have your windows locked or with a guard. Know that the screens for your window, that's not enough. You want to keep anything that's a strangulation hazard out of reach, and choking hazards, of course, and keep medications, anything that could be poisonous to your child, up and locked away. And the number for poison control is right down there if you want to write it down or put it in your phone right now. That would probably be very useful for you later on. Well, hopefully not useful, but you'll have it in your phone. Okay, so for vaccines. So know that vaccines are safe and they are effective. They're the number one thing that pediatricians can do to help keep your baby safe. So most vaccines, or most pediatricians that you meet, will be pro-vaccine, and they will be implementing the schedule that you see here. So here are the vaccines to expect in the first 12 months. So I'm just going to touch on a few of them, the ones that you may not be as familiar with. So for the Tdap vaccine, very, very, very important in infants. So it's highly contagious. It can present as just a cold in an adult, but in an infant, it can be very, it could actually be fatal. Often babies, they stop breathing, they can be hospitalized, and they can die. So it's something that you definitely want to protect them from. And in terms of outbreaks, generally, we don't see too many cases overall, but we do see a peak incidence every 3 to 5 years. So it's still definitely around, and that's why it's very, very important to make sure everyone is up to date on their vaccines. So in order to prevent it, of course, vaccinate. Mothers will receive the Tdap during their pregnancy, and then you want any caregivers and siblings, and then your infant can get this vaccine around 6 weeks. So here, they're just a couple pictures showing you the effectiveness of this vaccine. So you can see there, once the Tdap vaccine was introduced, there was a huge decline in the incidence of this infection. And also, you can see that this largely affects infants, and it can cause a lot of complications for them. So it's really important. Okay, so for Hib, Haemophilus influenza, this is a bacterial infection that causes really bad infections of the throat and cause meningitis. We generally only see this in less than 5 years of age, and those that are usually under-vaccinated or have not been able to complete the vaccine series. And again, the vaccine for Hib is very effective, and we've seen the incidence of Hib decrease by by 99% with the implementation of the vaccine. Okay. So you'll see there's definitely a trend here. So the decreased incidence of these infections go down by a lot once the vaccine is introduced. But so for Strep Pneumo, this is something that we see often as well. It causes bad ear infections, pneumonia, sinus infections, meningitis as well. Very preventable though with the vaccine. So you'll see here is another picture showing once the vaccine was implemented, how much of a decline there were in cases per year. Okay, so for development, so overall there's going to be a lot of changes in the first 12 months of your baby's life. So I'm just going to try to touch on a few of those here. So by the first month, they should recognize your voice. By the second month, you start seeing some cooing, smiling, a little bit better head control. By 4 months, they're able to self-soothe at that time. They start becoming a lot more social. They're babbling, they're laughing, they're reaching for things. 6 months, they're really starting to explore their environment orally, so that's why I mentioned you want to start childproofing before then. They're bringing everything to their mouth. They're trying to sit with, usually with assistance at that point. They're definitely rolling over, and sometimes they're starting to crawl at that time too. At 9 months, they're pulling to stand, they're starting to cruise, they're using more sounds, usually saying mama, dada at that point, waving bye-bye. And 12 months, you generally see a little bit more mobility, so they're able to take 1 or 2 steps. They're saying mama, dada specifically at that point, usually another word or 2, and they can follow simple commands. So tummy time. Tummy time is very, very important. I always really recommend this early on, as basically as soon as the stump falls off, you want to start tummy time. So that's really early, so around a week or so. It offers many benefits, including benefits for your gross motor skills, for the strength of the neck muscles, back muscles, arm muscles. It helps with decreasing SIDS, and then also it helps with the shape of your baby's head. And so again, you want to do this as much as you can. Ideally, up to 50% of their awake time should be in tummy time, so that's a lot. So I usually just say, whenever you think about it, do it. You might want to wait until maybe before a feed though, because sometimes they might have some spit ups. But generally, even just a few seconds is better than nothing. So small little spurts throughout the day is better than waiting for the perfect time. So overall, for development, for your infant, you just want them to feel loved, special, valued, safe. You want them to gain that confidence in what to expect from their environment. Know that in the first 1 to 3 months, they cannot be spoiled. And usually in the first 3 months, it's mainly about you and your interaction with them. They love your face. They love your voice. They love hearing you sing to them, talk to them, call them by their name. And 4 to 7 months, you're going to be doing all those same things, but also introducing other things like dancing a lot more with them, showing them to, or bringing them around other children. They're a little more interested in toys at that time. And 8 to 12 months, and also earlier on too, you want to do a lot of floor time. So get down on there with them, spend time with them on the floor so they can develop those gross motor skills. You want to teach them to say bye-bye, play pat a cake, peekaboo, and playing with toys, of course. Okay, and that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and now I'll answer any questions that you may have. Okay, so the first question is, how can you reduce baby's acid reflux? Which medication can we give? So as I mentioned, so every baby has a level of reflux that is normal and usually doesn't cause problems. If it's starting to cause problems though, you should talk to your pediatrician. But some of the things that you can do to help, which I did mention on the slides, are, but I didn't go through it actually, so I'll go through it now. So basically, holding your baby upright for 20 to 30 minutes after a feed. You want to do frequent burping. So between breaths, you want to burp really well, or even after every 3 to 5 minutes. You want to do small, more frequent feeds, and you want to avoid any sort of interruption that might startle them. So loud noises or flashing lights. And then if beyond that, if all these things aren't working, you definitely want to talk to your pediatrician, and they'll talk to you about maybe initiating a medication, but that's usually way later on once you've tried to help them out in other ways. Okay, and then this question is there a formula that's closest to breast milk? So there is. Both of the infant milk and the Similac have more of the like the higher more expensive formula that is the closest to breast milk, but in general, actually, infant milk and Similac are very, very, very close to breast milk. Those companies both have tried to make just the most basic formula that is the closest thing you can get to breast milk. And they're very well studied, and usually babies tolerate them very well. But each one does have more of like the higher end formula too, but generally it's not necessarily needed. Okay, next. So the question is, do we need to warm thawed breast milk? So it depends on the baby. Usually they don't like it when it's cold. So I would recommend at least getting it to room temperature, but knowing that once you have gotten it to room temperature, you do have only a couple hours to use it. When it's cold, you have 24 hours to, so basically if it's still in the refrigerator at that point. And most babies do prefer it to be a little bit on the warmer side, or at least at room temperature. Okay, so can you touch on the benefits and risks of a pacifier and when to introduce it and when to stop using them? So pacifiers can be great, but of course there are risks of nipple confusion. So usually, if you want to wait until good breastfeeding is established, is usually the rule that most pediatricians will say. Sometimes around 2 weeks is when you'll get to that point. Some babies in the beginning do very, very well, and they take the pacifier and they have no problems. But there is a potential for nipple confusion, which basically means that they might prefer something that's more like the pacifier, so you might run into issues with breastfeeding. So we do want to make sure that you've established good breastfeeding first. Benefits though, obviously it's nice. It's a nice soothing mechanism for your baby, and also it does have a it has been shown to decrease SIDS, so I am a fan of pacifiers. The hard part is obviously getting them off, and also they start to rely on them for sleeping and for soothing, and so it becomes a little bit more of a challenge to wean off of the pacifier. Usually by 2 years of age, we definitely want to talk about getting rid of the pacifier. Even by 12 months is when I usually start talking about it, because it just becomes a challenge after that. Okay, so the question is, what helps with constipation for a 7-month-old baby? My baby does not show interest in plum or pear juice. So this is obviously when they're starting to eat solid foods. So when you introduce solids, you can run into some constipation. And this is really common and not so worrisome, especially if they were pooping just fine before you introduce solids. So water, as I mentioned, you want to introduce some water while you introduce your solids. So I usually recommend giving it a sippy cup so that you start to get them used to that, because at 12 months you want to get them off the bottles anyways. So water helps, lots of fiber. Even if they don't like the plum or pear juice, it's actually prune juice that's really helpful, and white grape juice. But I actually try to gear towards more, or lean more towards the more real stuff. So just fiber in general. So prunes, beans, green vegetables, dark fruits, all those things. If you want to incorporate that into their diet, I usually just start there and the water. If that's not working, then you might want to try a little bit of the juice. So prune juice or white grape juice. And if these things aren't working, then I would talk to your pediatrician. Okay, so does bottle feeding breast milk provide the same benefits? Sorry, I'm just right. Okay, so does bottle feeding breast milk provide the same benefits as directly feeding them from the breast? Will it affect supply? So yes, they are definitely getting breast milk, so that if that's the route you want to take, that is just fine. I overall say to families, whatever you decide that you want to do for your child for feeding, that's the best choice that you can make for your family. So I know that there's pressures to do one certain thing sometimes, but whatever you find to be the less stressful and most enjoyable is what you want to do. Yes, in order to help your supply, the best is really breastfeeding and latching on. Your baby will produce the most milk from you, but I've definitely have had many families that have just, they do pumping and they do bottle feeding with the breast milk, and their supply is just great. So overall for supply, it's skin to skin, so you can definitely do a lot of skin to skin, latching, and it's taking care of yourself, drinking water, and trying to enjoy and not be too stressed. Okay, so this question. My 7-month-old screams if I put her in her bed when she's drowsy and cries. What should I do? Okay, so it depends on the family, really. It's hard. So basically, kind of what I already mentioned is that you want to establish a good routine. So during the day, you want to have consistent nap times and feeding times. You want to keep that the same every day, have everyone on the same page. And then when it comes to the bedtime routine, you need to do the same thing each time also. So same order. So whether it's bath time, reading, rocking, then down, just keep doing that each time and start it at the same time every night. If they continue to scream and cry when you put them in their bed, it depends on the family and the child. So some parents will just let them go and you see what happens. But if you do that, be consistent with it. Do it every night. So basically, it takes about 5 days/nights in order to establish a new habit. So you'll see that the first 2 days might be terrible, whatever you decide to do, but stick with it. And then by day 5, usually they'll get used to it. So either you just kind of let them be upset, or you soothe them until they calm down. But I would never recommend taking them back out of the bassinet or crib. So just be near them, soothe them, sing to them, read to them. And again, do the same thing though every night and just be consistent with it. That's the main thing when it comes to sleep training. So the question is, will my antibodies for Tdap pass to my baby? And yes, they do. So that's why I'm a huge fan of vaccines. The Tdap vaccine, when you get it during pregnancy, the antibodies pass through to your baby. Same with the flu. So you definitely want to be up to date on your vaccines. Okay, so the question is, my stepchildren are not vaccinated at all. Should they not be around my baby for the first 2 months? So it's tough. For the first month, you really want to protect your baby. So that first month, very minimal outside visits anyways is recommended. That's the time where your baby is most susceptible to infections that can spread to their brain. Their blood-brain barrier is actually really loose at that time, so anything can spread very quickly. So you want to avoid too many visits anyways in general. And then obviously avoiding anyone that's sick. That's also important during that time, or even after, until they start getting their own vaccines. So ideally, you want to wait until your baby's also getting vaccinated. That's what's going to keep them safer. And every month that goes by, they do get stronger too. And at 6 months, they can receive the flu vaccine. So the longer you can wait, the better. But for stepchildren, those obviously are their siblings, so it's really hard to really keep them away for that long. So just be as careful as you can, and that's something that you'll have to just talk about with your family. But I don't want to keep them away if it's obviously important for bonding. But those first 30 days are very, very important. So you want to keep them as safe as you can. I usually recommend just the mother, baby, and partner during that time, and then after that you start kind of slowly introducing them to other family members. Okay, some more questions here. Some water. Okay, any advice on infants and dogs? I have 2 Basset Hounds, so I definitely know about this. So it depends on the dog, too. You want to make sure that your dog is good with children. But some things you might want to do are obviously make sure that your dog is healthy and they are kept up to date on their vaccines too. You want them to be as healthy as possible. And then you never want to leave your child alone with your dog or any pet for that matter, because you just don't know what might happen, and regardless of how gentle and how good they seem with children. So always being within arm's reach. Something that you might want to try, which I tried to, is to before you actually bring your baby home, have someone bring like a blanket or a onesie that they've worn and bring that around your dog, and so they can start getting used to their smell before they actually meet them. Okay, so do all family members need to get the whooping cough vaccine? I got it 10 years ago for my niece. So anyone that's in direct care of your infant should be up to date on their Tdap vaccine. So you can easily get this through your PCP or your family doc. And so basically anyone that really is going to be involved in their care. And then also any children around them should be up to date too. Okay, so this question is pretty similar to what I already talked about. What is recommended regarding visitors in the first 3 months? So kind of what I said, you want to keep them as cocooned as possible. Even not even just cocooned, it's mainly just you and mother and partner for those first 30 days. Those are the days that your baby is really most susceptible. So very limited interaction is really advised. And then after that, slowly, but make sure that they are vaccinated and obviously not exhibiting any symptoms of illness. The longer you can wait, the better. Okay, so what do you recommend between bassinet and crib? So that's really just based off of your space. So for me, in my room, I don't have enough room for a crib. So I started with a bassinet. I actually just started with a travel bassinet. That was something that I thought that would be very useful to have in case I go anywhere. And you don't want to have to spend a lot of money, and it's safe. So I had that, and then I will eventually transition to a crib. I don't have room by my bed. So actually my baby right now is in a pack and play because you can use that otherwise around the house too. So it really depends on your space and your preference, but they're both safe. Just make sure that they don't have any of those things that I already talked about that are risks for SIDS. Okay, so how long for tummy time increments and how long per session? So that depends on your baby too. So you want to just base it off of their tolerance. So some babies will really not like it in the beginning. They will be rooting, they'll be fussy, and so you want to flip them back over. You don't want them to think of it as you don't want it to be a bad experience for them. So just base it off of your baby. And if they want to stay in there for a long time, great. Just keep them in tummy time for as long as they want to. But you don't want them to fall asleep, of course. And just base it off of them, because up to 50% of their awake time should be in tummy time. And this question is, what's the best way to thaw breast milk? So that depends on how fast you need it. So you can either have it in the refrigerator thawing out. They have little devices that you can put water in and that heats it up slowly, or you can just run it under some hot water. Usually running it under hot water is what thaws it the fastest, in my experience. Okay, so when can a baby go outside and how long do we need to wait to put them onto grass or sand at the beach? So I like for them to be able to go outside. It's good for the mom, it's good for the dad, the partner, and it's good for the baby too. Getting some fresh air is always a good thing. In the beginning, I do recommend, so again, the first 30 days or so when the baby is most vulnerable, you want to maybe go at off times where you may not run into that many people, because you'd be surprised how many people will actually just reach in and touch your baby, even if you have something that's covering them. So try to go at off hours, of course avoiding direct sunlight, and big crowds. And then in terms of playing in grass and sand, they're going to be putting a lot in their mouth for a while, so you can do that, but you just watch them. But the longer you wait, the better for that too, because you want them to be a little stronger in terms of you don't know what they're going to be exposed to. So getting some vaccines in them and then waiting for them to be a little bit stronger. And then be careful, by 6 months they're putting everything in their mouth, and 4 months they start trying that too. So when can a baby go in the pool? So that's also, there's a huge range of recommendations for this too, but it's kind of the same concept. You want to keep them, being exposed to this would be just fine earlier on, like putting their feet in there, especially if it's a pool at your house. But if you're in a pool that's at like a rec center or something like that, where there's a lot of children, potential for a lot of contamination, I would avoid that until they're a little bit stronger. Okay, so why is sunscreen not recommended for infants? If we live somewhere sunny, is sunscreen better than no sunscreen? So it's best to wait till when they're older than 6 months, and that's mainly because they absorb everything through their skin. So it could be bad for them if they absorb the sunscreen, but the caveat to that is if you cannot avoid direct sunlight, then yes, it's okay to put sunscreen on intermittently. But there's very rare scenarios where you can't avoid direct sunlight. So if you just keep them covered, keep them underneath something, that's really the best way to go about it, because you don't want to be putting something on them that could get them or make them sick. Okay, so how often should we bathe the baby based on their growth? So usually in the beginning, most parents bathe them about once a week, and that's just fine. So when they're really little, they don't really need much more than that. You don't need to start bathing them, daily. That's actually really based off of what you want to do. But it is nice to have a nice routine, so that the sleep training that I talked about, being consistent, it's nice to have, bed, rocking, reading, sleep, the same thing every night. So that's something that you could implement, and it shouldn't cause any problems. Some parents don't like to do it every night, and that's just fine too, as long as your routine after that is consistent. So 4 months is when you start the possibly sleep training if needed. Okay, so and then what are my suggestions for cord bank? So that's a more of a choice that you have to make amongst your family. If you have some conditions that are in your family, so genetic conditions that you might want the blood for later on, that's definitely something you might want to consider. But if there's not something in the family that, like I said, is genetic or syndrome, then it's not obviously always recommended, or it's not needed. Let's put it that way. It can come in handy possibly, but it is pretty expensive to keep it. So unless you have a big reason to have it, again, some sort of syndrome or disorder, then you don't necessarily have to. It's a personal decision on that one for sure. Okay, last question. Okay, so the last question is, do you recommend using diaper cream with every diaper change? So I'm usually more of a less is more person, but it's definitely not harmful to do diaper cream with every change. Sometimes though, you might see some babies get some irritation if you overdo things. So usually I tend to say, if you start seeing some signs of like a little bit of redness, start applying the cream. To try to prevent it from getting worse. But if there are scenarios where you notice that your baby gets more rashes, then you might want to just apply it more frequently. Usually they do just fine with prevention cream too. So, but like I said, I'm usually a less is more type person. If you ever are in a scenario where the rash is getting out of control, definitely talk to your pediatrician. They will help you out. And I think that's all for our questions. And again, thank you so much for listening. And I hope that this was helpful. And good luck with everything, and take care, okay?